Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in rolling out zero trust network strategies and technologies. With me on today's show are Chris Cleary, Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Navy, Alma Cole, Chief Information Security Officer, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Brian Campo, Acting Chief Technology Officer, Department of Homeland Security, Junaid Islam, Director of Public Sector at Verizon, Sammy Lane, Director of Technology and Strategy at Okta, and Jim Richburg, Field Chief Information Security Officer at Fortinet. Well, we went crashing into 2020. We were modernizing up and down the stack, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, introducing a whole lot of technology, a lot of it to address zero trust. And then we got even a more complex operating environment. I think all of us probably said to ourselves, boy, I guess this is why, zero trust was invented. And so here we are in this environment. And I got to give it to OMB, by the way, who didn't just come out with an edict, a directive and said, hey, implement this and have it done in 180 days. We all know this is an ecosystem that has to be done. Alma, let's start with you. You're in a very complex environment. You got thousands of trading partners. You have the entire trading public, thousands of employees. Where are you in regards to the state of trying to successfully implementing, no doubt, zero trust in your environment?
Good morning. So with zero trust for us, it's really a journey that we started on a couple of years ago. And I think it's important to point out, so everyone's talking about zero trust as sort of a complete concept, but really it's made up of all sorts of different fundamental building blocks of information security that we've had around, really forever. But now I think we actually have the technology to actually implement all of those principles in a way that we haven't been able to do in the past. So for us, it comes from obviously security is the number one priority, but then right behind security for us, where we have a very, very intense operations that we need to maintain across the country, across the world, on a 24/7 basis. And a lot of systems that we're extremely reliant on for our field operations and to keep cargo and trade moving. For us, we start with resiliency, and we pick up on a couple of really critical initiatives that DHS has been pushing in the past. That includes both the CDM initiatives as well as the migration towards the TIC 3.0 initiatives. And I think for us, our zero trust journey has been building on top of those. So a good example for us right now, we're extremely excited about the TIC 3.0 standards and taking what was this common set of IT services that a lot of folks were hosting, either themselves or going out to MTIPS provider, where all the services are kind of bundled in one, a little bit more generic. Now we're breaking a lot of those services apart, taking them sort of piece by piece, and we're able to move them out into the cloud, into SaaS providers that are best of breed for those services, and implement them in a way that provides way more resiliency than having all of our eggs in a legacy TIC basket, for example. But then also, as we implement those and these other cloud security capabilities, we're doing it in a way so that we're extremely explicit on the right user and the system that has the correct level of patching and configuration management, and we're authorizing the systems as well, so that really that user, that system, that whatever unit only has access to view exactly what it needs to view, and it can do that in a way from a routing perspective that's actually incredibly direct, instead of having the old paradigm of, look, you have your inside trusted network and everything on that trusted network is trusted equally, and you have issues there with weakest link, and we're kind of getting rid of that paradigm to where now it's just sort of the one unit that's connecting in, and it accesses exactly what it needs to do and nothing else. And if that then there's a breach, or if there's some sort of issue with that one system, then it really, really limits the damage that could be done in those potential scenarios.
Yeah, really tightening up that blast zone. Gone are sort of the guards, gates, and locks, if you will. You really have a framework now, and it's the right place, right person, right capability at the right time. Let's roll over to Brian. I can't imagine that across the department, we just heard about how complex CBP is, and I think a TSA and Secret Service and Coast Guard and CIS, et cetera, interagency. I would say, thank goodness this is a framework. It's a constellation of activities, right, that come together. Where are you in regards to sort of taking it over the top at the department? Where is the department as far as, state of zero trust these days?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand, right, from a chief information security officer, you're focusing on that risk reduction, you're focusing on implementing security. I think in the CTO office, we're really trying to develop that strategy. We're trying to understand, how does zero trust fit into all of the IT goals that the CIO wants to do. We're trying to figure out, how do we give guidance, how do we develop frameworks, strategies, reference implementations. We're really looking at that true ecosystem of zero trust. And I think the other piece where we're trying to get to is, we're really trying to tie all the different pieces together, right? You got things like, cloud access security brokers, you've got cloud security gateways. We've got a big initiative to try and move, applications out of the data center and into the cloud. We're looking at options for VPNs, so that we can get, better access, more specific access. So from our perspective in the CTO office, we're really trying to develop that strategy, that roadmap, trying to give reference implementations out to the components. You mentioned, a few of the components that we've got at DHS. You've got a CBP, but you've also got a FEMA, right? So they operate very, very differently. They have very different concerns. They've got very different things that they're trying to do with their security, and they've got different operational tempos. So for us in the CTO office, our journey really is trying to understand all of those least common denominators, trying to understand how zero trust can have a positive effect. But then we're also thinking about how the users are interacting with it.
Yeah, no doubt, and trying to make it easy on those users, right? And so it's sort of transparent to them, but it's a good experience to them. But you're making sure that that trust gets established when and if it needs it, at what level it needs it, et cetera, and everything from a FEMA volunteer to a sworn officer at CBP, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've developed our roadmap, one of the things we've tried to do is, we've tried to increase capability as we're reducing risk. We knew VPNs were going to be difficult in the age of COVID. So what we tried to do, one of the first things we looked at was really trying to look at options to reduce the load on our VPN, and really be sort of customer centric as we're thinking about zero trust. How can we increase capability while also reducing risk?
And allow each operating component the flexibility that they need to, based on risk. I'm sure AMA certainly does appreciate that. Chris, how about over at the Department of Navy? You all are up to a lot of things going on over there. Very complex environment. We're hearing about the enduring telework apparatus that you're rolling out, et cetera, et cetera. Give us the state of zero trust at the Department of Navy. I can't imagine that that's not a framework that is very much embraced at that capability, being that you're so complex.
Yeah, and not only embraced, now directed at some point.
Okay.
If for those of you tracking what's happened within the Department of Defense, principally around COVID and pushing people outside of our environments, one of the things we found almost immediately was our capacity, through VPNs, just to try and keep everybody teleworking at home. It just, we choked on it very, very quickly. So as we tried to, introduce more capacity, of course, we came up with this construct of this commercial virtual response, this CVR environment that Microsoft helped us get to, where we were going to allow people to connect directly from their devices, whether it was government furnished equipment or personally owned devices, from wherever they are, directly to the environment without going through any security stacks. Well, immediately we were, that was this idea behind getting to a zero trust construct, which was actually directed by US Cyber Command. They pushed out a planning order to each of the services to say, hey, come up with a use case where you can roll a zero trust environment out to support whatever. So in the Navy's case, we chose the reserve community and sort of like the recruiters community, because they're traditionally lived outside the DoD and to begin with. I mean, they spent almost their entire careers to one degree or another, not within a controlled environment. So we said a perfect use case. And actually they were pretty advanced when it came to it already, because it was the way it's just the way they were stood up to begin with. So the Navy's zero trust construct was principally using one vendor. So we went kind of with this all Microsoft solution to demonstrate that we could set up a zero trust environment. The Army chose a little bit of a different, combination of tools. The Air Force yet again chose a little bit different way of doing it. What we demonstrated is we could really establish a very secure, almost overly secure environment that we could put users in it in the zero trust environment. The guys at NCDoc and Navnet Warcom could almost monitor every keystroke. I mean, it really was connecting people with the information they needed to have in a in a secure way. Because one of the buttons that we pushed, and I say we pushed the believe button when we set up the CVR environment, is we knew in the beginning it was inherently an insecure environment. But the ability to get people teleworking and to sort of get out of the threat zone of COVID, do all the things that we needed to do to enhance social distancing and just kind of get people out of the buildings, we had to weigh that with their ability to be productive. So the CVR environment was this thing that we came and said, hey, we're going to accept a certain amount of risk in this environment because it's not perfect. It's not exactly what we would want. But the idea is to do that and then to transition to the zero trust environment to continue to facilitate this telework. And I think one of the encouraging things that we're finding because of constructs like zero trust, and zero trust really is a construct, it's not a product or, although there's lots of companies that would like to make you believe it's a product. And the other big thing that we're trying to figure out is for, the Navy, the Department of the Navy being this massive thing. Well, not everybody's going to be able to necessarily be within this Office 365 environment to have that zero trust capability. So in other instances, we got to think about how to architect our zero trust a little bit differently. And what we're finding is the cornerstone of that is identity. So we're really kind of pushing an identity strategy through the department, because for us to really get to a true zero trust environment, you need identity. Where in the Microsoft environment, it's provided for us by Microsoft. We use sort of an identity construct provided us in that environment, so that requirement is satisfied. Where for those people who are going to have to live outside of that Microsoft environment, well, now we got to come up with another way to ensure their identity is solid and then architect it. But the idea over time is to migrate to some form of the M365 setup. And so far, we've been very happy with it. Fleet Cyber is really the guys that have the rose pinned to their chest to sort of execute the plan org, and they're doing a great job of it. So yeah, we're really happy so far.
You can't, that's this architecture being embraced couldn't have happened at a sort of a better time, if you will, under the circumstances as the environments have gotten certainly a lot more complex. Junaid, how about at Verizon? You all are right smack in the middle of this, and I want to applaud Verizon and all the partners for really stepping up and making sure that the experience that needed to be happen for the entire, public sector community was there and available so that they could keep doing the work that they do. How about at Verizon? What's it look like over there as far as the introduction of zero trust and enabling that capability inside of your ecosystem?
Great, thanks for the question. From a zero trust perspective, the first thing I would say is there's really two implementations for category: zero trust as a product and zero trust as a service. At Verizon, we focus on zero trust as a service, and we integrate it into the wireline and wireless networks. And where we fit into the large tapestry within the federal government is one of the challenges the government faces is contractors, consultants, suppliers who work outside its boundary but are connecting in. And as everybody knows from a state-sponsored cyber attack, while federal facilities are very secure, the weak link is all of those little companies that supply you. It's very hard for them to, lock down. So we have been focusing on building zero trust as a service. So the vendors, contractors, consultants, as they connect in, they are secure. And we implement the entire zero trust stack with strong identity verification, role-based access, as well as cryptographic controls. And we think zero trust as a service actually is going to become one of the most important implementations, because as we look long-term in terms of how people are going to work, I think we're going to get over this COVID thing, that's for sure. But I think this, whether you call it work from home or distributed working, that's here to stay for, well, I think for the rest of our lifetime. And I think the ability to integrate zero trust into your wireline and wireless service is key. And it's going to be key to also the Department of Defense and federal government pushing out the zero trust model through their ecosystem as they implement zero trust within their facilities. So we need both. And that's really Verizon's goal.
Fantastic. And I'm sure that everyone is glad to hear that. And no doubt, as Chris talked about, sort of that enduring telework capability there to sort of broaden outside of the guards, gates, and locks, really important. Sammy, we was mentioned about how ID, identity management, is certainly a key element of the entire zero trust architecture. What's going on at Okta to sort of make sure that's available, seamless, et cetera, so that it can be part of the picture?
Yeah, that's one of the tenets is that identity is the new security perimeter in a way. If you look at how modern technology gets consumed, it is quite different. And as such, it's really about giving the right access to the right people in the right context, and then evaluate that continuously. So in that sense, that zero trust journey often starts by getting that identity house in order. Now, we saw this massively when all this work from home tenets came into play this last spring, and some of our customers were saying that was the biggest unrequested test of their VPN capacity, both from licensing and from technology perspective that they've ever tested. But those agencies and those customers who were further along in the journey already at that point found that it didn't change that much when those restrictions came into play. If they had already taken that tenet of saying, well, let's look at the user and their device and look at the full context of the access, then we can actually make better access control decisions. And we can consume new technology much more rapidly than in the traditional model. So in that sense, those forces that had been moving into the same direction all just lurch forward very, very rapidly. And we saw that federal, state, and local government level, where even counties who had a program in place to move towards the zero trust model over the next 18 months, all of a sudden found themselves in one weekend having to implement that. And we saw a lot of these projects, spearhead ahead at massive speeds, both in the industry and in the agencies.
All of a sudden, it's all hands on deck in a situation like that, no doubt. But even prior to that, as somebody was pointing out, these tertiary systems, we certainly learned with OPM and several of these other situations, that occurrence that a lot of these environments, you can't trust anyone, right? This whole concept behind a zero trust and this continual authorization type of situation, which I think is really important to just instill that, bake that into the ecosystem and just sort of take that whole issue off the table. All right, we're gonna take a short break and we'll be right back. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust. We're just trying to do a top line here, state of the state. Jim, I'm gonna throw it over to you at Fortinet. You all are right smack in the middle of enabling this capability, a piece of this capability, certainly for all of public sector and certainly private sector. To just give us a top line, state of the state. How's it going?
Hey, Luke, well, it's good to be with you again today. And, as you said, Fortinet is in the middle of the ecosystem. We've got a broad and deep set of capabilities. And what we're doing with our federal partners is focusing on helping them build the foundations for zero trust. Depends on whose model you look at. You've got, 3 to 6 pillars of doing it. And as challenging as it can be for our federal partners to do zero trust in an agency headquarters network environment, as my federal colleagues have described, it gets exponentially harder to do that for organizations that have a national or even global operating footprint. So let me give you a real quick top line of 3 different use cases of success stories that we've done over the past year with federal partners. Let me pull out, we've already talked a little bit about identity is a key. A user identity. We helped one cabinet agency recently create a capability to better enforce multi-factor authentication and to integrate this new capability with existing user identity capabilities such as PIV cards. And they're rolling that out for 40,000 users coast to coast. Device management and access control. We've helped another agency identify and define security policy for headless devices on their network. We know those, of course, are a real bear. You can't, that's the source of problems with IoT, et cetera. So when you get these devices on the network that have the potential to become rogue devices, we gave them the capability to integrate that device management and access control with other capabilities they had in their infrastructure to track the behavior of those devices and to be able to alert if they started displaying abnormal behavior. And then the whole policy enforcement and segmentation, that's another key to doing zero trust. We helped a third agency that had a really broad operational network infrastructure, a complex one, move the focus of their enforcement and policy core closer to the localized data, basically via better segmentation. So we gave them the ability to have smaller firewalls that still shared information and acted as a unified whole for the policy enforcement, the ability to have that synchronized and consistent. That's the core of zero trust. So again, you got all these pillars and you've got a player like Fortinet that can say, we can help you both develop those, and people have already mentioned, I think it was implicit in what Brian said, integration. You have these disparate things, you need to make them work and play well together. So we're giving our partners the ability to introduce something new and to harmonize it with things they already have in their infrastructure.
Sure, and really give them choices. It's almost like, again, it's this constellation, sort of Lego block kind of configuration that allows them to enable this capability as they see fit. Brian, how about over you? Want to give an example of sort of one specific area that you'd like to highlight? So you're coming at it from a different angle, as you pointed out there, as a CTO versus a CISO, but I'm sure you have an example of one particular thing you'd like to highlight in regards to something that you all have embraced over there, enabled, authorized, whatever it may be, to allow this capability to start to get propagated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've actually had some pretty good success in a few different areas at DHS. I mean, we took a very practical approach to zero trust. We really looked at, again, impact. How can we positively affect the security posture and the users' users' interest in zero trust? But I think our biggest one was really the implementation of those things that tie into our cloud assets. Things like the cloud access security broker, the cloud security gateway. We knew that we were going to try to move things out of the VPN. But even prior to going into the telework posture that we're in now, we knew we were moving a lot of things to the cloud. We were closing down a data center. We knew that cloud was going to be a focus for the department. Part of that is mission, part of that is just optimization. So we knew we were going to need cloud-based solutions for our security, and we knew that we were going to need to be able to have them in a scalable fashion. So, for us, we really got a little bit of a head start in trying to address, the overutilization via telework. We had started our cloud security gateway work going back to maybe the December-January timeframe. And we had started on the cloud access security broker around January and February. So, for us, that was a little fortuitous that we had a chance to kind of get out ahead of that. And we had we started moving some of our access early in March, prior to everybody heading out for the telework posture. But I think, one of the best cases that I can say is that, when everybody showed up on telework in that mid-March timeframe, we had flipped the switch to kind of move the highest volume applications, those email, those, productivity apps, some of the things that we had already moved out to the cloud. We were able to flip the switch pretty quickly and kind of move those types of things off of the VPN, get that VPN traffic to things that were primarily still internal, things that we really needed to keep inside the network. And those things that we had moved outside the network, we were able to get them off the VPN. And we had very, very little problems with, almost quadrupling our VPN access requests and VPN traffic, really because I think we had been a little bit proactive in trying to get, CASB, CSG, getting applications to the cloud, and really giving, those alternate paths that didn't require a VPN to come into the network just to go back out to the network.
Be able to scale it up quickly and also continue to make sure it's very secure. Sammy, how about at Okta? Can you give us an example of a program that you all have implemented on behalf of the public sector or the private sector, quite frankly, that's really allowed some of this, zero trust capability to be enabled inside of an environment?
Yeah, absolutely. There's several great examples, and they come at all scales. I mentioned earlier that we had a local county government who was facing this, and as you can imagine, their budget is has a different number of zeros than some of our partners here on the call today, and it meant that they needed to really move forward rapidly and use the technology that they already have. So oftentimes what you can do is really look at your whole technology stack and take an inventory and say, does this actually give me those core design principles or properties of zero trust? Does it give me better context? Can I act on that context? Is it perimeterless by design? And you can look at your whole security and technology stack and say, what if we just tie this together? What is the glue that's tying it together and allows us to move forward rapidly? We have, of course, federal government partners and industry customers who are doing the same thing. At the high end of the scale, there's an industry example that might be the best, where FedEx, as a global logistics company, really made a move and accelerated as well. I think that they really moved all of their critical applications. Instead of a 14-month timeline, they did over a literal weekend, where they took tens of thousands of individuals and enabled access to all those critical applications into a zero trust model. And the switchover was literally 36 hours. And I think the original project plan was several months. So if you have those building blocks in place and you've done your inventories, sometimes you can truly accelerate those kind of transformations. And it's all about, like was mentioned earlier, it's not really a technology issue per se, although we are all dealing with technology. It's really a fundamental shift in that mindset on saying, how do I measure the access? What are the controls that I have? How do I apply them consistently? And often we see that since we are at the heart of that auth and auth C decision, we are often used as the glue that ties that into a complete solution.
And if I may, and put those operators in a situation where they can make a good, solid risk-based decision about
Absolutely.
which way they want to operate as they're kind of stacking some weight on top of these things. Speaking of risk, I just can't imagine, again, the complexity that you all have, thousands of trading partners out there, the traveling public at large, et cetera, and then all of a sudden it gets flipped upside down. Your entire workforce now is in a new operating model on top of everything else you're trying to do. Give us an example of sort of where you fit a piece of this in there and that allow some of this zero trust to enable some of these capabilities that you're just impressed upon you.
Yeah, so really this starts with, I think, a transformation overall of how we deliver network services. fundamentally we're changing how we connect all of our systems together. And a lot of that goes hand in hand with the migration into cloud and into other SaaS services. And naturally, as we're picking up and now we're making, these cloud services are obviously internet based as the foundation of what we're doing, then, it makes sense to be able to have the right technology to be able to connect directly into all those services. But one thing that's really, really important to Footstomp is, while we're doing that, we have to obviously ensure that we know what all of those endpoints are doing, that we have still, common centralized security logging and security management of those devices, and that full picture of all of these integrated services and how they're coming together so that we can optimize all the traffic while still maintaining, not only all of the legacy standards, but again, also this idea of zero trust where they really can only access exactly what they're explicitly authorized to access. So, one of the areas where this is really, really important for CP overall is how we do IoT. Obviously, we have a lot of different types of non-traditional technologies, things like unmanned aerial systems, ground sensors, all sorts of other technologies in the radiation portal monitors, other things in the field that really don't fit the same model. And in the past, I think our answer was, well, we'll just air gap these things. We just won't plug them into the rest of the network because they don't meet the same security standards. And that as a response, it really is just not acceptable anymore. It's not what we're doing anymore. And in addition to the heightened security requirements that we have, now we're also really trying to build better common operational pictures across all of the various mission sets that we have. So we're bringing all that data from all the different types of sensors in, and we're building those common views, which means the connectivity and doing that securely is really, really key. So we're using IoT type technologies along with 4G and 5G, and we're able to take some of these other endpoints and tunnel them. Essentially, the idea is go directly into the cloud, directly into like API gateways and other types of services where we can exchange just the exact data we want after we've made a specific identification on what we're talking to, and we have some integrity checks and things like that. But really bringing that data together in a way that we can dynamically add all sorts of different things onto the network. You just drop a SIM chip on it and it gives it the connectivity it needs to hit the internet and then to hit our services. And it really is expanding, our view and the options of how we integrate technologies in a way that we couldn't even think about previously.
Right, and much more seamless. And I hear you. The days of the air gap on the IoT, which are, as you pointed out, thousands of those, right? That instrumentation, you need the data that it's collecting so that you can analyze it and make informed decisions. So I'm glad to see that this framework is allowing that to happen. Junaid, how about at Verizon? We just heard about 4G, 5G, et cetera. Give us an example of where you're implementing some of this capability that's allowing the that zero trust kind of ecosystem to start to be enabled inside of an agency or even a private sector environment.
We've got a lot of zero trust projects here at Verizon, but I want to call upon one because it was so interesting, and actually I was involved in it quite a bit. Sallie Mae decided to move its loan processing to the cloud. As everybody knows, Sallie Mae is a regulated financial institution, and the regulations around all financial information was really written probably 20 years ago. And the context was a physical server that is air gapped in a building that's locked down. As everybody knows, it's impossible to change banking regulations, but what we're able to do is show equivalence. And what we did is we deployed something called a software defined perimeter gateway, an STP gateway, which is how we manage TCP for zero trust. And we deployed it in AWS and Azure. And what they did is it effectively blocked TCP from connecting to the cloud. So these even though these were public cloud instances, they were effectively black. You couldn't even bring up a TCP session. And then what we did is we configured the network so that only an inbound connection coming from the Sallie Mae data center would be accepted. Then in the data center, we set up a relay that the employee had to be badged into the correct floor, into the correct laptop to access the instance. So what we were able to do and show the regulators is we could use a zero trust architecture to make a cloud instance behave exactly like a physical server in their data center, which was locked down. The reason I use this as an example is it was all software and networking, which we could extend out to any model. So the important point here that I think for the listeners is that the zero trust architecture allows us to synthesize in software and using network technologies any kind of like physical environment in the virtual world without compromise. So zero trust is not about giving something up. In fact, it's the opposite. We can take things like, in this case, Sally Mae, banking regulations, which we couldn't change, and actually recreate them in a completely cloud and virtual environment. And I see more of this as the future.
Fantastic. If I may, that's a fantastic use case there. And on behalf of all the policymakers and regulators, I know they're trying really hard to keep up with the technology, but the great news is the technology has gotten so powerful now, you can do things like the example you just described there. Chris, how about Department of Navy? Can you give us an example of one area that you all are enabling that's allowing this, that zero trust is allowing you to sort of bring in some capability that perhaps you couldn't have done sort of short of a zero trust architecture?
Well, yeah, and I'm going to have to go back to a lot of the things I said in my first answer. You know,
Sure.
the Navy, the Department of Defense has always been chasing certain security constructs, right? Perimeter
And
defense.
Chris, if I may, you mentioned DODIN. I just want to make sure people know what DODIN is
Department of Defense,
on your last one.
yeah, Department of Defense Information Network, and then of course there's the DODIN N, Navy. So when we reference that, we reference it. It's the network.
Sure.
Originally run by DISA, where there's enclaves inside of it that each of the services have. So when I say DODIN or DODIN N, I'm just referring to the Navy network. As we've looked at securing that environment over the decades, obviously we've followed different models, right? It went from perimeter security, then we were going down the comply to connect model for a long time, and then COVID really pushed us to want to adopt zero trust a lot faster. But arguably the Navy and the Navy's networks, particularly at the transport layer, somewhere between 10 to 15 years behind where they need to be. So there were lots of things, there's lots of housekeeping that we needed to do. So as we looked at zero trust, what really enabled us to do it was the fact that we were doing it almost exclusively outside the DODIN. We were setting up an environment that lived outside the DODIN to connect users who live outside the DODIN to information that for the most part exists outside the DODIN in some of these cloud environments. So and I guess the analogy would be, you never let a good crisis go to waste, right? There are a lot of these things that we were trying to do, but just being overcome with other events. I mean, you can only imagine the breadth of scope of priorities and different projects and different initiatives that go on within, an organization of 800,000 people and 1 million email addresses and 240 networks to one degree or another, whether accepted or unaccepted, that we're trying to manage. So what this has really allowed us to do more than anything else, and the technology, I think lots of people have addressed the actual technology challenges and the ways that technology has come to it. What this has allowed us to address at the Department of the Navy is a new way of thinking. We probably, without COVID, might still just be talking about zero trust as a construct. The deputy J3 over at US Cybercom, General Paul Stanton, he was a true sort of believer in this contract of zero trust. And I remember pre-COVID, he would brief it all the time. And that's just what it was. They were briefing slides. And we got in meetings, we listened to it and we heard it. We said, that's great. It's the next thing, right? The new shiny thing. And then COVID hit and it changed everybody's thinking. And it went from a science experiment to, hey, we got to do this. And again, what was encouraging in an organization as large as the Department of the Navy is how quickly we were able to adopt. And really, when you put the screws to a military organization, if they know anything, we know how to react and maneuver to respond to crisis.
100%. All of a sudden, right? You're laser focused, right? You know what to do. All these other things sort of get out of the way, and it's time to implement this capability that obviously you guys have been discussing for some time, and that's a great example, great use case to get focused and then take this capability and really take it to the next level. I'm glad to hear that. All right, we're going to take a short break and we'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust. We were just giving specific examples of where we've been able to implement a part of this capability, the framework, et cetera, whatever it may be. Jim, let's go over to you at Fortinet. Give us an example of where you all have been asked to put together a capability that's allowed this to be enabled inside of an agency or a component or even a private sector.
So Luke, let me start from the top of that. Pre-COVID, I'd say the best examples of the implementation of zero trust were probably in the financial sector. You know, they're well-resourced. They've got the ability to put all this together. Within government, pre-COVID, it was probably in the air-gapped networks, probably the closed classified networks. But when you talk about zero trust, it relies on the attributes of visibility and control. And time is of the essence. You know, you may want to say, I want to do things statically, so I'm at least doing segmentation and the one-time authorizations, but ideally I want to do it dynamically. And that implies integration and automation. So you talked about architectures and frameworks. Fortinet has the fabric as its approach to putting this together, which means it's not just us, it's 400 partners in the ecosystem. So we have been able, with post-COVID, to work with federal partners to say, you want to increase speed, you want to do this on a risk-based basis, and we can give you this capability, whether it's for the identity management, whether it's integrating the enforcement engine, to work with things that are already in your ecosystem, because you got a lot of pressures on your budget. So we've been able to help a lot of them implement this remote telework in a secure fashion post-COVID by building on this broad ecosystem, Luke.
Fantastic, great example, and love that use case. All right, we're going to go to priorities. One priority, top priority, Brian Campo, for this year in regards to zero trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think our top priority is pretty easy. I mean, we're focused on TIC3. We really see that as being a huge enabler for the department. You know, we are lucky enough to have the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency as part of the organization. So, you know, we've gotten pretty clear understanding. We've been working directly with NIST to really get a deep working level knowledge of TIC 3.0 implementations. We've got a couple of early sort of references out there. You know, I anticipate that the DHS CISO is going to put out some pretty good guidance on you know, where we're going to go with TIC 3.0. And then we from the CTO's office are going to work with the components to really try and give them, you know, a clear path to implementing TIC 3.0 across their constituent applications and programs. You know, and TIC 3.0 is such a good enabler that I think it gives us a good launching point for a lot of the other things that we want to do. You know, it supports data center migration. It supports, you know, a lot of the application security that we've got to do. So for us, you know, we are definitely going to be focused on TIC 3.0 as
TIC 3.0, fantastic. Glad to hear that. And I think, again, I got to applaud the OMB for the way they laid that out and giving you all the flexibility. Amma, number one priority, zero trust for you this year.
We have a lot of things that we're juggling in the air, but when it comes to number one, align with zero. So align with zero trust. We got to start with identity. Right. And so we're making huge inroads into, I think, finally ditching some of our legacy identity management solutions. This last couple of years, we've cleaned up a lot of garbage, and our identity governance is actually looking very strong. We continue to bring in more data to complete that picture of everything we know about a user and make sure that it's the right user that's actually authorized to access the right systems. And when they leave, they're gone, and everything else that goes along with that. But really pushing our identity out into cloud, enabling us to have easier ability to connect into partners instead of having to issue people, you know, usernames and passwords that are external to the agency, things like that. Those are really critical for us. And that solid identity within the cloud is really the building blocks for us for the future of zero trust.
Fantastic. Chris, number one priority for the Navy on zero trust.
That's a good one. To get to zero trust,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
it's a journey in itself. And I would say from the enterprise IT standpoint, our migration to M365 and how it enables a zero trust environment, I would say from the department of from the Don CIO side of the house is our number one priority. But when you look through the breadth and scope of what the Navy's tasked to do, how that priority gets racked and stacked against our real priority, which is get to a Navy of 355 ships, right? So that is always, there's competing priorities in an organization as large as the Department of the Navy. So, you've got to balance enterprise services with warfighting functions, and there's a happy medium. But again, this crisis has really helped us get the enterprise initiatives front and center with the Secretary and the Chief Naval Operations. So that part's been encouraging. So it's really our number one priority is just to continue to keep the pedal down on this. And then, like anything else, as the emphasis on these things sort of wanes over time, to ensure that we don't lose momentum, right? And we don't get driven off to something else. But yep, just
100% laser focus, and that's great, because then once you get that down and get it screwed tight, you can stack weight on that and move on to all the other pieces of a zero trust apparatus. All right, well, we only have a few minutes left, and we always like to close out sort of painting a picture of the future. Brian, I'm going to send it over to you first, and give us a sort of what does it look like in a couple of years? You're two years further into the zero trust capability, enabling that across the department. What does that look like? What are you expecting at that point in time?
Yeah, I think as we look out past this year and into the the 3-year horizon timeframe, I think we're really looking at integrating opportunities for increasing security through PEPs, looking at trying to get application level evaluation of security constraints, things like understanding the data that an application is sending across the wire. Really getting a lot more granular in how we're applying permissions, utilizing those things that we've got in our zero trust stack. Getting our data defined, so we can better understand whether a certain request should be available to any user. Understanding where that data is going, how it's being used. I think data is definitely going to be that longer term goal for us. Just because, as we start to get our infrastructure and as we start to get our connectivity a lot more secure, we're just going to keep going down the stack, getting a little bit more granular. And I think that ends up really heavily in the data array and really at the application level. Ultimately,
the data is the oil, right?
Amen.
Jim, how about at Fortinet? What does it look like in a couple of years for you all?
So Luke, apart from the functional pillars that we've been talking about throughout this, the identity management, the access control, et cetera, I think the keys to zero trust are automation, they're the interoperability of data, and those are really the architectural things. What's going to drive this? The engine that's going to use your oil is AI. AI is what's going to give you the speed and scale to do zero trust, certainly in a dynamic environment where you want to do it and say, I'm responding in real time to what I see. And what I see for the federal government is to build on what the private sector has developed in that. Because if you look at AI and you start from scratch and do a crash project, odds are it's going to crash and burn. I've got friends who can tell me 300 ways they can fail on an AI project. Private sector's 10 years into doing this for cybersecurity purposes. It's become more powerful. It's also become more portable to the point where we can now give federal partners forward deployable versions of stuff they can put in their environment, because we recognize that you have networks and data where you don't want even the telemetry about it to go off-prem, but still you want the capability to sense a disturbance in the force and to be able to react to it. And your partners in industry can now give you that AI engine that can ingest that can see the anomaly, and that can even give you the AI-driven policy response to it. So don't invent a wheel. We got a bunch of them.
I love it. AI being incorporated fully into the solution set. Sounds fantastic. Sammy, how about over at Okta? We talked a lot about ID management. What does it look like in a couple of years? Are you just going to do a retina scan and magically I'm going to log on? What can we expect?
Yeah, there's a lot that obviously is bandied around, but I think it's going back to those fundamental basic principles. We've already built a lot of things around the identity of the user, identity of the device. It's about being able to act on all of that context. So we recognize that although we have a really broad portfolio of access control tools and ability to do access for not just applications but to infrastructure, it's really going to that basic principle of saying, what are the actual controls that you can put in place? And we're iterating on that. If you look at like the NIST guidance, the 800-207, there is no one architecture. There is no one trust algorithm that's going to solve it. Instead, we're really focusing on not only building what Okta is building organically and it's already delivered to our partners here, even on this in this panel today, but also making sure that the broader ecosystem is fully enabled. So we need to go deeper as an industry into things like the continuous authentication authorization is something where standards don't exist today. So we're working with industry partners and agencies and NIST to define what those standards look like to get that future. So I think that's going to be critical. It's not just, the auth and OT decision at point in time. It's having that deeper integration across the ecosystem to be able to do it continuously.
Sort of this complexitron of activity, and I love the idea of this continuous authorization, right? Because at any given moment, that environment, that risk posture could change, and you got to have that situation real time. Junaid, how about at Verizon? What's it look like in a couple of years? What can we expect from Verizon?
From the Verizon perspective, we are making a huge investment in Zero Trust as a service, and we believe that an as-a-service model, just like computing has gone to an as-a-service model, is just the easiest for a federal government for a number of reasons. They just buy what they need. But the other benefit is creating different Zero Trust networks for different departments and teams. So if you take the idea of a secure enclave, which was how we built top secret networks, and we have physical systems, now imagine being able to spawn 10, 100, 1,000 Zero Trust network instances that are self-contained enclaves with a set of people and a set of resources. We think this is the most elegant approach for a Zero Trust implementation because it gives the Department of Defense and federal and state agencies complete latitude to spin up or increase capacity and reduce capacity. And as everyone knows, there's a number of mandates to move to an as-a-service model to save taxpayer money, and we are fully aligned in implementing that.
It's a fascinating concept there, and something that you don't, quite frankly, at least from my little version of the world, don't hear as much about. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And certainly it's something that federal government, where they can buy something as a service and ensure the integrity and cost effectiveness, et cetera, certainly would want to do something like that. So I love the idea. Amma, how about at CBP? You talked about a very complex environment over there. What does that look like in a couple of years? If I'm a freshly minted officer coming through FLETC, getting ready to get out there on the line, what can I expect?
Yeah, so for Zero Trust and for where we're going with technology in general, I mean, really, we're looking at enablement. We're going to make it easier for both the officers to have what they need anywhere, anytime, and make it easier to be able to connect into our partners. So I think that's the first thing is, embracing a lot of common standards, making things just basic and easier and available and resilient wherever you are and whenever you need that data, that information, that access. The other thing I think what we're going to see is we're going to have much more intelligence about really everything that's going on in the network, and along with that intelligence, be able to understand the posture, understand all the various aspects of all these devices and all the people and their access rights they have, what they're provisioned for, what they're not provisioned for, and the governance layer to ensure that that's the way that they're actually being given the access. But also on top of that, we overlay the automation, and that's going to be, I think, one of the next big keys for us in security is not having people have to chase down problems or users or systems, is that the network will have the intelligence and then act on that intelligence to enforce the appropriate standards and then respond as appropriate if we see breaches or other issues.
Sure, and not only that, just as you're bringing people onto the enclave and sort of the environment changes, it's dynamically done. People coming off the enclave, right?
Absolutely.
And sort of that gets sort of that cleanup as you talked about, just sort of, I don't want to say magically happens, but happens and happens properly. Chris, how about at the Department of Navy? All right, so now you've got this capability installed, right? It's fully realized. You're off and running. What does it look like in a couple of years from now? And what are you going to expect to see in regards to the ability to continue to enable a zero trust environment and give what you're looking for on those ships and aircraft, et cetera?
It's going to change the way we work. I mean, principally, it's going to change the way we work, shore-based, right? Because that's where most of the zero trust things come into play. You could argue to one degree or another. I know it's not based on zero trust principles, but our ships at sea are kind of their own little enclaves, right? And we have secure ways to get them information back and forth when we choose to communicate with those devices. But it's just going to allow us to change the way we do business, which is more adoption of telework. The reduction of physical facilities that we have to maintain, the flattening of our network. And really, as we understand that, the end user, right? It's all about the data. So first of all, it's all about the data. But, that if I can push my workforce just about anywhere on the planet and provide them in an environment that they can get to information without having to come through what would be legacy architecture, that's a huge win for us. And just to be able to continue to adopt that and be assured that the organizations that are set up to operate and defend our networks, principally Fleet Cyber, Navnet, Warcom, NCDOC, provide those, to make the job as easy as we can on that workforce is kind of the number one objective. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of getting there.
Fantastic. And let them do what they do, which is defending this nation. I want to thank all of you today for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know it's tough out there. You guys are dealing with some not very easy stuff. So really do appreciate it. I'd also like to thank the sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at the Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank the listening audience out there that tune in to us every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of Federal News Network.